Hello there and welcome to this episode of Psych Attack. I'm Dr. Jasmine B. MacDonald. Today I'm catching up with Dr. Taylor A. Braund to hear about his research in digital phenotyping for mental health. In particular, we're going to talk about Taylor's research into the link between mental health symptoms and keystroke metadata from smartphones. Welcome, Taylor.
Thanks for having me, Jazz.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I always love to kick off episodes with some background. Tell us your origin story. Why psych?
Why psych? I mean, it's pretty long and twisted journey, but I guess I started in undergrad doing psych and then did honors research in evolutionary psychology. So kind of looking at facial expressions and the difference between Duchenne and non-Duchenne smiles, or genuine and non-genuine smiles. And then from there, I kind of didn't really know what I was going to do once I finished because I knew I didn't want to be a clinician or get registered or anything like that. So I ended up going into industry and working on in clinical trials. So 2 large international clinical trials for a number of years. And then after a while, I was like, I think I want to go back and do more research. So went back and started a PhD at the Westmead Institute for Medical Research. And that was looking at treatment predictive biomarkers for antidepressant treatment outcome in people with depression, specifically people with comorbid anxiety and depression. So finished my PhD, again, did not plan on what I was going to do after. So I ended up getting a role with the Black Dog Institute in their workplace mental health group. So they were running a large cluster RCT. They needed management, operational stuff. So I took on that role. And then after about 6 months in that role, I transitioned into another postdoc looking at digital phenotyping and kind of been working in that area ever since. So kind of jumped around a little bit, but it does kind of fit together a little bit in terms of looking at treatment predictive markers, just different data types. And yeah, you find a way to make it fit together.
Yeah, nice. A couple of questions have popped to mind for me there. I'm wondering, did you enjoy your time working on RCTs?
I did. I mean, look, they were international large clinical trials, so you got to travel internationally for it, got to
Nice.
And when you're younger, it's very appealing to, do travel and see the world and all that kind of stuff. As I've gotten older and I'm doing more travel for conferences, I'm a little bit less enthusiastic about it now. But yeah, it was a exciting time. And I mean, the research was super interesting and all the people working on it were really amazing and smart and, a great kind of networking and gateway into the research area that I do now. And I guess at that kind of time, I didn't realize the overlap between the researchers who work in these fields and that it's very diverse. So you see a lot of the same researchers, or I see a lot of the same researchers now. So yeah, just a great experience.
I've always been interested in research and methods quite broadly and been really open-minded, but you meet some folks who are on one side of the fence or the other with RCTs and what they can tell us. And I think often the point is missed that it's well, actually, it's not what method, it's what's the question? And that leads us to which method to use. So I thought I would just suss that out, consider it something you shifted out of, but it sounds like it was transferable skills for what you're doing now as well. It's not completely different.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, learning about the operations of RCT, kind of what's happening behind the scenes in terms of IRB and ethics and data quality and patient participant safety and all these kinds of diverse roles that are required within kind of large scale RCTs, and then seeing that applied in new RCTs, with different kind of goals. But yeah, very base set of skills that's very universal and transferable.
Awesome project management skills for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I want to admit naivety around what Black Dog Institute looks like on the inside. Clearly, obviously I know about the Institute and I've seen a lot of products that have come out of the Institute, but you mentioned you're working in a team that's focusing on occupational context, right?
So there's a workplace mental health group within
Yeah.
the Black Dog Institute, and they focus on, pretty much anything to do with workplace mental health.
Nice. What are the kind of other major teams that you have at Black Dog?
So there's suicide prevention. That's quite a large team. There's the population mental health teams. There's the digital phenotyping streams of research. So it can get quite diverse, and there's also a lot of cross-project work as well. So you kind of get the experience of working across these diverse research fields, which is amazing, having worked across diverse projects before, I guess.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so we've mentioned the term a couple of times now, digital phenotyping. Tell me about it. What does it mean?
I guess if you Google digital phenotyping or you read any of the big papers that have come out, they'll all use the same definition that came out in 2016, and I'll read it for you verbatim. It says, digital phenotyping is the moment-by-moment quantification of the individual level human phenotype in situ using data from personal digital devices.
Okay.
So that is the
It's a challenge on
verbatim.
the working memory, but yep.
Yeah. So I think as these fields evolve and also they become a bit more fit for purpose, the way that we operationally define these things. So how I would define digital phenotyping within our project or within the projects I work on would be, leveraging any digital data that you can collect through a smartphone to make inferences about mood or behavior, to try and improve aspects of clinical care. So diagnosis, symptom monitoring, predicting treatment outcome, predicting relapse, things like that.
I'm wondering about what kinds of data can you use for phenotyping?
So the two broad categories of data are things we call active data and passive data. So passive data are things that are collected in the background on your phone without any kind of input. So think about your global positioning system, the GPS, the way that you move your phone and the angles, the accelerometer and gyroscope. So these things are just kind of being collected in the background. The other types of data are active data, so things that require manual input. So you can think, if you ask someone to complete a typing task, ask them to give a voice sample. Maybe if you work in psych research and you use ecological momentary assessment or EMA data, where you ask someone to complete, miniature versions of questionnaires throughout the day to give a more granular kind of measurement of mental health. All these things would be characterized as active data. So collectively, digital phenotyping, we use the active data and the passive data. And then from these data, we do a process called feature engineering, which is where you try and develop features that you can map onto specific mental health symptoms. So to give a concrete example, you have raw GPS data comes in. You say, I want to try and develop a feature that's related to maybe something to do with social behavior, social withdrawal. So we'll say, how often does the participant move around? Do they leave the house? How far do they go? Are they going to significant locations? Are they going to shopping centres? Are they going to pubs? And then ideally, those would be able to map on to the symptoms and give you some information that you can then apply.
I think in the work that we're going to talk about, one of your papers, it seems like it was mostly active data, but I'm wondering around because I have the sense that folks who might be slightly skeptical or concerned about research in general, but then as soon as there's any kind of meta tracking, what kind of permissions and stuff do you need to access this kind of stuff on people's phones?
There's a range of proprietary and open source digital phenotyping platforms that exist out there in the world. Some of the popular ones are like the BWI platform or MindLamp. At Black Dog, there's an in-house platform called MindGrid, and these platforms, all the kind of checks and balances in place to kind of guarantee the participant privacy and security and things like that. But they also are quite diverse in the amounts of data that they collect. So some differences between the platforms, but you can think of all the passive and actively collected data that are being, continuously collected through the phones. And there's also some novel kind of digital phenotypes being explored now as well. So I saw a paper recently where they were looking at selfies within camera rolls and the angle and the lighting of the selfie and what that might map onto specific mental health symptoms at times. So I think people are getting really creative in terms of like what they're using these phenotypes for.
That's interesting. It's not what we're going to dive into today, but can you remember any like high-level takeaways from that selfie study?
It was something to do with the lighting and the angle. So as in terms of the features they extract from the selfies, I think those were up there as some of the important features. But yeah, I need to read it again.
Yeah, that's fine. Unreasonable for me to expect you to be able to speak to other people's research on the spot. So I think that like anytime you're doing this kind of study, right, you're working on large data sets. So it's making inferences across a large number of people and like a massive amount of data, I imagine then, because this stuff is being entered, accessed all the time. So your paper talks about the role of machine learning in this data. Is it data analysis that we're using machine learning?
Yeah, for the data analysis. I mean, you can use machine learning for like different tasks. So I guess our application is what would be called supervised machine learning. So we have the features and we know what the data labels or the outcomes are. And then we kind of use the models to try and find the patterns within the data, as opposed to something, say, unsupervised machine learning, where we are asking it to explore the data to find hidden patterns within the data. So,
yes.
Yeah, the family, I guess we'd be using supervised machine learning models.
Okay, cool. So on a practical level, how do you do that, Taylor?
Well, I think now we've come a long way and it's a lot easier to apply machine learning models.
Because you're not chucking it into Chat GPT and going, what does this look like?
But it is funny that you mentioned that, because they are developing large language models that you can give written text from participants' data, and then it can, infer mental health status as well. That's like another kettle of fish. But
interesting.
On a practical level, how it works is we get the data. We want to split the data into, say, our training and test samples, usually 80, 20 or 70, 30%. Then within the development sample, so the 80%, we apply some form of machine learning model. We can say maybe a shrinkage model like ElasticNet or Lasso, and that involves tuning either one or a set of hyperparameters. So you can do that a number of ways as well, either by saying choose a random block of numbers or providing it a grid of numbers to search across to find the optimal combination of hyperparameters. And then it basically optimizes the model to find the the best prediction for whatever it is you're looking for, whether that's, maybe you have mental health symptoms and you have your features and you want it to try and find some combination of these features that are going to predict the mental health symptoms. I think the advantages of using the machine learning models as opposed to, say, some kind of classical statistical models like a regression or, something that might be more universally applied, is that it can handle these large complex data sets. So it has the ability to find these complicated, potentially nonlinear patterns within the data to enhance that predictive accuracy. And it also can include some of the methodology, like feature selection, that traditionally you would have to do separately, can be inbuilt within the machine learning model. So you don't have to say, I want to use these variables or those ones based on maybe some preconceived idea of what their predictive ability might be. You can just leave that up to the machine learning model to decide.
Nice. I am wondering, is this like a kind of a high-tech specific version of essentially what I think the first lab manager where I worked would talk about data mining, like having really big data sets and trying to I clearly don't know enough about this to be able to extend that question any further. But or are you like, no, Jazz, that's a completely different thing?
Well, you can definitely mine your data. I think one of the important things for data mining is that you need a data set large enough in order to be able to externally validate the predictions, because you can mine any kind of data set, but I think unless you're able to have a realistic view of what those accuracies and predictions are going to be, then it really does limit the kind of translatability of those findings.
For sure. Yeah. For you being in this, Taylor, this is probably going to sound really dumb, but from the outside and really kind of grasping the practical aspect of this, the assumption I'm making is you have some sweet software that you're working with, right, that is set up to do this. Like it's a souped up version of a basic, almost like what I would do in, say, SPSS. I'm saying, here's my data and the variables I want to create, and then I'm looking for relationships across them and running tests. You have like a souped up machine learning software package that you use to do this, correct?
I mean, I use R, so R
Nice.
programming. So, and there's a lot of packages within R that are very well developed. The Carrot package is probably the most popular. It's a very big library that you can apply a lot of machine learning models to. There's also the TensorFlow and the Keras packages if you want to get into deep learning. I mean, they're really computationally expensive and you need to start leveraging high performance computing, which can also get expensive. But for run-of-the-mill machine learning models that you can apply, these can be run on local PCs with sufficient programming skills and a latest version of R.
Heck yeah. I'm glad I asked what I thought was a dumb question, because I think that's great for listeners to know that makes it much more accessible if they're interested, or if they're like, I might want to reach out and do some work with Taylor or similar folks. So cool. Thanks for that. I'm wondering if you could, talk to me about digital phenotyping and some kind of broader examples to help the audience understand the kinds of question or the kinds of real world problems we're trying to solve with this.
Yeah, sure. So one of the kind of immediate translatable applications would be using the digital phenotypes to identify these critical windows where we can use these interventions or just-in-time interventions to increase the efficacy of the treatment. So is there a specific critical window that can be identified using the digital phenotypes? A translatable example from medicine would be the glucose monitoring systems. So they provide real-time feedback on the blood sugar levels, and they can give the patient information on whether they should be taking insulin or consuming carbs. That would be similar to digital phenotypes identifying when the intervention should be applied at the optimal time to increase the efficacy.
That helps make things quite concrete, actually. I guess the way I've been thinking about this when I was reading your work is the information that this can potentially give clinicians. But from what you're describing, it also sounds like actually it can just be a prompt to the person for their own insight and awareness of increasing insight essentially, and like a little check-in of like, hey, could be a good chance, this could be a good time to reach out to your GP or to reach out to your psychologist or whatever else.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely going to kind of meet the clinicians in terms of their appetite for digital phenotyping as well, because there is such a broad spectrum of applications that people are investigating, from diagnosis, symptom monitoring, treatment prediction, but then also ways to integrate the clinician into the decision for how to improve these diagnostics and treatments.
That's really interesting. Are there some disorders compared to others? When we'll come back to psychology or mental health now, are there some disorders or conditions that phenotyping works better for predicting?
So I think some features are probably more relevant to some disorders. So if you're looking at specific symptoms within a disorder, maybe as kind of circling back to social engagement or withdrawal and GPS data with mood disorders. For, say, schizophrenia, voice and speech is a critical kind of symptom that can be addressed with digital phenotyping. So there's quite a broad research area looking at the structure of language within patients, and they get quite good predictive results using those features. So I think different disorders will be better suited to different digital phenotypes. And also, I guess you need some kind of symptom fluctuation. So if you have kind of uniform symptom levels, then it's very hard for digital phenotypes to track or pick them up. And then I guess also disorders that are not externally visible. So if you're taking movement and measurements and it's not something that can really be tracked with the phenotypes, and that can make it difficult as well.
So we'll talk more about this in a sec. You used, for instance, in at least one of the studies, a written task, but perhaps like it's sounding like what you're saying is that for some other disorders like a psychosis, schizophrenia, then potentially you could have built in some kind of speech task. Like I don't know what that would look like maybe having a prompt to talk about some aspect of the day or their week or something.
Yeah, so in the future-proofing study, the one that I'll talk about in a minute, there is a voice task within that study.
Well,
so
let's do this. Let's talk about the future-proofing task. Tell me, what was the deal with it? What did it aim to do?
So the future-proofing study was this kind of massive study. It's collected data from over 6,000 Australian adolescents across Australia, and it was a cluster randomized control trial looking at prevention for depression was the primary outcome. And as part of that study, they had the future-proofing app, which was a custom-built app, digital phenotyping app that collected a range of these digital phenotypes that we've been discussing. So in addition to the passively collected data, so the GPS and the accelerometer and the gyroscopes, they also completed a number of task-based activities to collect data. These included cognition tasks, typing tasks, voice tasks. And so all that massive amounts of data is kind of being investigated at the moment. And the one that I have been diving into is the typing data. So this captures the detailed information in timing between key presses. So this kind of research area has come from the field of biometrics, so authenticating people's identity. So the way that you type on a keyboard is kind of, like a password in a way. And I guess mental health has been leveraging this application to see if typing behavior is related to mental health symptoms or diagnosis. And I guess the main symptom that they believe that it should be mapped onto is psychomotor impairment or agitation. So that's a core symptom within depression, and this should kind of theoretically manifest itself with this symptom. Spoiler alert, I just finished the paper looking at the individual symptoms, and it doesn't seem like that's the case. But leaving that to the side, the idea is you can kind of use these total scales of mental health. So depression, anxiety, distress, or insomnia, which is what we looked at in the current paper, as opposed to looking at specific individualized symptoms.
So that's really interesting. I noticed through recording and editing audio that people have this pattern to the way that they speak. And I noticed it in myself that I do these pauses before, like partway through a sentence. So it sounds like what you're saying is that there's probably a baseline intonation, for lack of a better word, of how basically like the rhythm or the time that people typically spend typing or the pattern of typing. And then, like you were saying before, what we need is like a fluctuation in that patterns that we're trying to look for a correlation or association with mood in this context. Is that like a good basic summary?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I guess the way that you would expect these relationships to manifest depends on how you think depression is associated with typing data. So let's say you make an assumption that if one person is depressed, they're going to have psychomotor impairment. They're going to be type. So the hypothesis would be they're going to type slower, right, on average. But as we know, depression symptoms are very diverse, and some people with depression have psychomotor agitation, so they might potentially be typing faster. So it's also very individualized in terms of how these relationships are going to work.
I'm chuckling to myself while you're speaking about that because I'm thinking of being in early high school, having a sweet Nokia 3310, and it was this, you were pretty awesome if you could type super fast. And actually that, like I would, in my head, I'm like, I'd be thinking this is associated with some kind of, anxious, elevated state. But again, that comes back to looking for the fluctuations and changes and having large sets of data, and probably in a clinical context, being able to have other kinds of input that's brought, data collection that's brought in alongside this information that helps inform for this person or broadly for people who experience depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms. This is the kind of changes that we see.
Yeah, and I mean, it really depends on what the research question is as well. So for this paper, we are looking cross-sectionally. So we're kind of asking population level questions, like what generally are the associations between, say, typing behavior and mental health symptoms? Do people, type faster when they're more depressed, or do they type slower, or do they type faster when they're anxious? Once we have this kind of richer data, this longitudinal data, we can ask, I guess, more detailed questions like what are the individual typing profiles of a participant, and how do these, maybe predict future depressive symptoms? Do they predict whether you're going to respond to treatment, or do they predict potentially new onset of mental health issues or future mental health episodes? So it really opens the door to like quite a wide applications.
Totally. I'm wondering about in the process of establishing different phenotypes and thinking about how predictive they are. What does validation look like? Is this like we'll be working with a large, like you had 6,000 participants. Do you have information about whether there is a current diagnosis or they're currently accessing support for a certain disorder, or what does that look like?
So of the 6,000 or so who completed the future proofing study, about 1,000 had typing data, so they completed the typing task. And then of those participants, I guess the population cohort of future proofing is just high school students. Like there's no like inclusion criteria that requires them to have a mental health disorder. At a population level, some are, some aren't.
Yeah.
This is just a population scan of associations generally. So we do some subgroup analysis like throughout the paper. So we look at typing differences between males and females, and people who meet clinical cutoffs for certain disorders. But yeah, that's kind of the scope, at least this paper covers.
Yeah, nice. What do the tasks look like? What kind of stuff are you asking these adolescents to write about?
Well, there's two, as you mentioned, there's two typing tasks. So we call them the composition typing task and the prose typing task. Names aren't that sexy, but it doesn't matter what they actually do. So the composition typing task is the participants are given one of 8 prompts. So, a time I was happy, a time I was sad, my hopes for the future. And then they're asked to write a certain amount of text on that topic. And the other one is the prose task. So in the prose task, participants are given one of 8 scripts. And these scripts are kind of like short stories, and the participants are asked to write as much text from that short story as they can within 30 seconds. So we get the prose typing data, so the timing between their key presses on the prose task and the composition task. And we kind of do some supplementary analysis looking at the timing of the typing between the tasks. And we generally find the same patterns with the mental health symptoms. So for this paper, we combine the typing behavior across the tasks. So, but if you're really interested, you can find the supplementary material online.
Excellent. Presumably you're thinking that there was going to be a difference between the two tasks, right? And like we love as researchers to be proven wrong, and that's fine. You adapt, you can put those two together. But what was the team's thinking on having the two tasks and how they'd be different?
The idea basically is you want to have kind of 2 different goal-directed tasks, where you have kind of a time limit. So, 30 seconds, you want them to be typing as fast as they can. And the other one where they're kind of given free reins to have some expression to write out the answers. And the composition task where they're given the prompts and they can type, freely. You can then take that text and then you can apply linguistics analysis to it and develop linguistic digital phenotypes as well. So that's something we've been doing in other studies and in the future proofing study.
Interesting. So that's less about, say, things like time and patterns in typing and more about the words used and the sentence structure and stuff?
Exactly, yeah. So you can maybe say, what is the proportion of words in their body of text that have a positive affect connotation? How many have a negative affective connotation? Kind of a very frequently cited finding is that people with depression use a higher frequency of first person singular pronouns. So a lot of I in their sentence structure. And this is kind of mapped on to symptoms with rumination. So when you're ruminating, there's a lot of self-thought. So, and that manifests in writing styles. So, and then, ideally somewhere down the road, you could potentially map typing features onto linguistic markers and look at how they relate to each other. Maybe you have a composite marker, which is a combination of their typing behavior and what they're actually writing. So there's a lot of kind of ways that these can all be brought together.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. All right. And you had the 2 writing tasks, but they were brought together as the one, as like a composite task. And the major outcome was depression. So what did you find?
So basically what we found is that overall higher mental health symptoms were very weakly associated with faster typing speed. So more depressed, faster typing speed, but less typing frequency. So they're typing less. This is kind of counterintuitive to what you would expect, considering most people have found previously and would expect that more depression or higher levels of depression would lead to psychomotor impairment, which would lead to slower typing speed. So I think it's a really interesting finding in terms of what is it that's unique about the data collected that we have and how that differs from other studies that are out there. I mean, a few off the top of my head is an adolescent sample Most of the other studies are in adults and in clinical samples.
Right.
Also, the type of typing that they're doing. So these are task-based tasks where there's a very popular digital phenotyping app called the Bi-Effect app. Alex Liao developed, and this captures typing behavior in, I guess, natural use of your smartphone. So it's not a goal-directed task. It's just collecting the data passively throughout people's days. So maybe there's something that's happening between asking someone to do a task and just collecting it in the wild.
Wow, this is fascinating, Taylor, because I'm thinking about stuff like, not at all trying to pathologize individual stresses or anything, but I think everyone listening has a sense of when you're feeling more or less anxious or stressed about something, how there is info on your phone that would easily help show that or remind you of that. Like, for instance, even picking up your phone to check, unlocking your phone or going into a certain app and checking messages I think the range of data and the practical applications is really interesting. But I cut you off because I was musing of how it's very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Picking up a phone and unlocking it, that's activating like the gyroscope. So that's like sending stuff. And a lot of those kind of metadata that are collected through the phone. So call logs, text logs, how active you are. And then, you can even kind of infer sleep patterns based on like phone movement. Or if instead of a smartphone using a smartwatch, they have pictography, and you can kind of have more detailed sleep and movement patterns on there. But yeah, it can be very diverse in terms of the things that it's capturing. The other results in the paper, I guess, is we be interested in looking at any differences between males and females. And females show this similar pattern of faster typing with higher mental health symptoms. But for males, it seems to flip. They do actually show slower typing with higher mental health symptoms. So I think like kind of investigating why these findings are occurring is something that's like going to be of high interest moving forward, because a lot of the times people either just want to partial out these covariates or it's not addressed. So seeing that it has, quite a different impact between male and female is, interesting.
I'm wondering about what you would like to come from this work, like that applied aspect. We've talked briefly already about phenotyping broadly and applications, so I have no questions about that. But if people are reading your work or looking to apply the work, or you yourself, like what would you like to see come out of this, the kind of practical applications of the key learnings?
Yeah, well, I would characterize the findings as descriptive, as kind of these are like some very high level population like associations. Obviously, the associations are very weak. Like there's no practical application. Like we ran a whole range of machine learning models to see if there was some nonlinear kind of association between the features that could predict mental health symptoms as well. The best way I can kind of describe it is like trying to get blood out of a stone. There's just really not much there. So I think one of the implications from it is to move the focus towards applications that might be more fruitful. So, exploring whether they can be used to identify these critical windows to implement these just-in-time interventions, whether the data captured longitudinally can identify, these person specific signatures of their typing behavior that might be more fruitful. So I think it as important as knowing where to go is at least tells us where not to go or where the applications aren't going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important foundational work that future work is going to build upon. Cool. I think that's a very reasonable, valid response for sure.
Yeah, I think that just another thing to add is I think there's so much we don't know at the moment about digital phenotyping as well. Like it's such a young field. And I mean, just the differences between the tasks, differences between the digital phenotyping platforms, how they're collected, the differences between the samples. Like there's just so many factors that we don't know how they're impacting the results. So I think like methodologically, there's like quite a way we can go to improve this. But yeah, it is. And I mean, when I first started that paper, I did a systematic review and there was 8 other papers that have looked at keystroke features associated with mental health symptoms. Like that's it, 8 papers. So there's not many people working on it or looking at it at the time. So kind of if you want to develop like more comprehensive digital phenotyping, you kind of have to explore these novel methodologies like typing behavior. It's not something that's included in many digital phenotyping platforms, if at all.
That's really interesting that there's so much available data out there, but this really sounds like quite an emerging space as a method. So that's pretty exciting.
I think so.
What's next for you? Like, hit me up with some shameless self promotion. Like, what have you got going on? What are you excited about?
What am I excited about? So recently I'm diving into accelerometry data, so phone movement data, and specifically mapping it onto individual symptoms of depression, so anhedonia. Two of the things I'm excited about is looking at different data modalities. The second is we recently got funding for use of high performance computing, so we can really explore some more rigorous methodologies and pipelines, and even if we have the bandwidth, go into deep learning. It's quite a learning curve, but I think there's some application there, and also having the bandwidth to kind of leverage multiple data sets with digital phenotyping data now that they've completed. So yeah, merging the data sets, looking at specific applications, like these just-in-time interventions, new feature development, and specific symptoms.
Yeah,
It's quite
cool.
there's a lot going on there, but yeah.
Yeah, sounds like it. That's really exciting. And if folks who are listening want to follow along and see what you're up to, what's the best way for them to keep track or reach out?
Yeah, so I put everything on Twitter. I think my handle is at Taylor Braund, so you can find me on there tweeting about, everything science and sometimes non-science. I am on LinkedIn, and yeah, I have profiles on the UNSW website and the Black Dog website. So my email should be on most of those. So if you're interested in learning more or wanting to collaborate, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. I mean, this is, I think, how we came into contact was through Twitter. So it's a good place. Like most of the folks that I talk to on this podcast, I've met on Twitter. I'm like, this is how we do our water cooler conversations and find like-minded folks. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to, especially I think if you're a researcher, to find your people on Twitter or LinkedIn. All of that stuff that we just talked about, links to the paper for that we've discussed today, and Twitter and LinkedIn stuff, I'm going to pop that in the show notes if folks are interested to go and check that out. I'm going to segue out of something that you said, Taylor, which was you're mostly tweeting about science stuff, but there's other stuff. What are you doing when you're not nerding out on research?
I play a disgusting amount of chess. Like I play a lot of chess, so I play online. It's really an addiction, and it's bad. So I play a lot of chess.
Do you need help? Are you asking for help right now?
No.
Have you always been into chess?
Well, I played in high school, and I liked it, and then I didn't play it for a while, like a decade, and then actually started playing again with Gabe, of all people. So I started, yeah, and then I guess our competitive like sides just flared. And yeah, from there, I've just been training and playing a lot of the time. So just making sure his level's not higher than mine.
Nothing wrong with some healthy competition. For folks
Yeah.
listening who are kind of long-term Psych Attack listeners, Gabe is Dr. Gabriel Tillman, and Gabe has been on 2 episodes of Psych Attack. So it was one of the first episodes where we talked about mathematical psychology, which there's a huge amount of overlap with what we're talking about today and Gabe's work. And turns out that, you know, good people know or find each other, and Taylor and Gabe are actually mates, which is cool. And yeah, the other episode, Gabe interviewed me about my research in trauma and news workers. Okay, so what do you like about chess?
Ooh, that is a really great question. What do I like about chess? Because if I'm not winning, I don't really like it at all.
Is the competition aspect or the challenge?
I think it's the competition aspect. Also, like learning techniques and then being able to apply them effectively is very rewarding. So, you know, learning, like it's a lot of pattern recognition and, you know, puzzles and learning openings and things like that. So, you know, applying them once you've learnt them and beating people is, yeah, very rewarding, I think.
Yeah, cool. Do you go back and watch like YouTube clips or research winning moves or like this kind of stuff?
I think it's a lot of analyzing games afterwards. So it's, you know, every game after you play, you can go through, analyze, you can find out where you made a blunder, where you've made a mistake, what the optimal move should have been, what the continuations are, what the lines are, what the right lines should have been. So you can probably spend more time analyzing than playing if you're, you know, getting obsessive. But yeah, it's a lot of time commitment if you're doing it regularly.
I bet. Yeah. I feel like I wish I knew this before because I could have worked in so many chess puns. Taylor, this has been a really great chat. I really like speaking to folks like yourself who are doing work that we have shared language, but what we do is quite different. And I really appreciate learning and thinking about the world and data and research and psychology in different ways. So I appreciate your time. I think what you're doing is awesome. Thanks for coming along and sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great time, Jazz. Great speaking with you.